Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. It's my lunch break. I'm taking a little break from painting miniatures, so I'm having a coffee. I've been reading through Soldiers of Napoleon, so I thought why not record a little review. So what is Soldiers of Napoleon? Of course, it's a set of Napoleonic Wargames rules written by Warwick of Ethos Games, who's also written Battle Group, Soldiers of God, Soldiers of Rome, and probably some other things as well. The set of rules are being published, or at least in conjunction with Gripping Beast. I know they're distributors as well. They are available from a few other retailers, and we'll cover that a little bit more at the end of the review. So those of you familiar with Soldiers of God and Soldiers of Rome will know that they are card driven, or at least to a certain extent, and Soldiers of Napoleon is no different to that. But I think that's where apart from the title Soldiers of, I think that's where the comparisons of the games end. The actual core mechanics of the game have obviously been completely rewritten and different because of the age of warfare and how well that matches. So why have I picked up this set? I've picked the set up because it kept appearing in my news feeds, as many things do when I get around to purchasing them. But I kept popping up on Facebook, it kept popping up in discussions and things. I know that the game was demoed at CrackCon 2, which is run with the Plastic Crack podcast guys, and I was supposed to be going, and I couldn't make it that day in the end because I was unwell. But I'd heard the game was quite interesting and it looked really, really good, and I just heard good things about it, so I started to look into it. I watched a short review or interview on the Wargames Illustrated YouTube channel. I've read the notes that Warwick did a few months ago actually in Wargames Illustrated when the game was in development, and I read his blog as well, which he talks about the development of the game a little bit and about the key mechanics, and there's a really good detailed kind of description of a turn. And then on the Gripping Beast website itself you can download a sort of a 4 or 5 page PDF which gives you a well written description of how the turn works. And I read it and I thought, I really like that. I really like the way that the cards work. And I know cards can be a little bit of a problem for some war gamers. They're concerned that their tactical ability as generals is taken away by the randomness of cards. Obviously dice are random too, aren't they? So for me it's all about how well the cards drive the game and give it flavour. And I quite like flavourful narrative style war games. I'm not really into any kind of competitive nature. If I've had a good few hours pushing nice toy soldiers around a beautiful tabletop, and that the gameplay itself is rewarding because there's an inbuilt narrative in the way the game design is, that really attracts me. And this stands out as something that can do that. Other than that, I play Black Powder, and Black Powder, as we know, is a sandbox set of rules that makes it very, very easy to push large armies around in a very beer and pretzel kind of game, and that's fantastic because that suits my kind of laid back narrative style of gaming. This kind of feels like it adds a little bit more flavour in some ways, and it also suited me in terms of the battle size that I'm most often going to play. So I thought this, if I'm going to have a second set of rules that I'd crack out for certain game types, this really stood out as something that might offer that rather than some of the other rule sets out there, which I'm sure are fantastic, but are just really, really big and in-depth rule sets in themselves. So what do you get? You actually get a set of cards along with your rule book. That's all included in the price. There's not something you purchase separately, so it's not an optional extra. It's the retail price for a Gripping Beast was £30. I think it's pretty much the same as that I've seen everywhere. Maybe 5 pence off or something like that through Cavalier Books. But anyway, you get your action deck of cards. There's 56 cards on there. We'll discuss those a little bit later. And you get your full colour softback rule book, which comes in at, I think it's around 128 pages. And it's very, very nicely presented overall. There's some lovely artwork in there, so original period artwork, post-period artwork, and then lots of well-shot images of the authors and playtesters' miniatures and things as well. So it's very, very nicely presented. It's easy to follow, it's laid out well, and I found it pretty easy to read. The cards themselves are made of that slightly smaller than standard playing card size, but there's plenty of available card sleeve protectors. I've already ordered some that will fit them, and again they're very, very high quality. Nice artwork on the back, and it's all very, very clear to read. And the final thing about the rules is, as it stands, they're not available in a PDF. I've got the impression that that's not something that there's a plan for. Looking at a couple of comments after questions are asked in groups and things. I don't mind that too much. I would have bought the rules anyway. I appreciate smaller companies, and there may be an element of risk, I suppose, if you put a PDF out there that people just share the PDFs around. As all Wargamers know, there's plenty of large file shares going around with loads of books and PDFs in, and then these smaller companies who really need the money from the sales maybe don't get them. So that's the benefit for them doing it. I think the negative would be just in the current stage of the climate at the moment, where shipping is quite hard and expensive and unreliable, especially post-pandemic and other things, potential B words. I suppose a PDF version of the rules opens up the opportunity for wider markets and more people playing your certain rules. I'm sure it's complicated and there's potential swings and roundabouts with there, but if they do ever make it available on PDF, I'll purchase it as well, because I quite like leaving my books on the shelf after I've read them the first time and using my iPad to kind of run games where I really like being able to sit and watch the telly when my iPad's normally near me. If I want to check a rule or something, I can just pick my iPad up and head to my library of books and things, but I totally understand it. So as it stands, I haven't had a chance to play a full game of this. I've put a few miniatures on the table and worked through a phase or two just to kind of get a feel of it, but I don't think I got any more of a feel of it than I did reading the very good descriptions of a turn. I didn't feel I learned any more just by sort of having the miniatures on the table to do that. So I look forward to actually getting down and having a proper game of it. One of the first times I was aware of the rules, or at least sort of piqued my interest even more, is watching Ralph Astley's battle report and his review of this set of rules, and I'm going to pop links in the end of this video for Ralph's review. So Ralph Astley is the name of him and his channel. He's a lovely guy, and he's done a really full battle report, so about 3 hours when he goes through the mechanics and things, and his review is about 45 minutes long as well. So what's the ethos behind the rules? As far as I can tell, it's a kind of a Division Plus kind of game. But it's not fixed. So you command an army that's about division size, but it might not necessarily be just a succinct division. So you could have just a division facing off against another division in a set scenario, so an Imperial Guard division or something like that. But then you could also command a section of a larger battle, and the rules are kind of linked with that and how you do it. So if you set up a scenario where you are a divisional commander facing off another, that might be all the game is, but you may also have a game of similar size where you are playing, your tabletop is a part of a much larger battle, and this really appealed. This is one of the things that stuck out straight away, alongside liking the look of the card mechanics. It's how I design scenarios, and those of you that follow me on the channel will know that my wargaming projects are often based around a particular historical battle or a section of a battle, usually, because the full battle's far too big for me to delve into. So I work out a bit of a scenario and start building forces towards it, and this is just perfect for it, because it means that the kind of war games that I'm looking at, a section of Waterloo, maybe around Erlon's attack or something like that, is when I start writing the order of battle I needed for it, I found that I had brigades as part of one division, brigades that are come up from reserve, some cavalry that are part of a cavalry division, and this set of rules is actually designed to specifically manage that and how that works, which is just really stood out as something that was quite good. So when you are the commander of a divisional area, so to speak, or a core part of a division in that kind of scenario, that you are getting help from other areas of the army. So you obviously get control of that cavalry detachment as part of the scenario. You may get some help from a reserve. You may well be a divisional commander, but your core commander or your army commander may come onto the battlefield at certain periods of the game to give you extra instructions to help you, and this is all built into the way the game works, which I just thought was quite unique and really cool. The game is also scale and base agnostic, so you can use any size miniatures, and you can use any basing convention. I've heard Warwick talk in interviews about he hates rebasing miniatures as a way a lot of people do, and we all have our own collections, and you don't want to keep changing them all the time. You want to, like in my case, play different sets of rules with the same set of miniatures. So it being set up that way means it's open to more people to play the game, which is fantastic. It doesn't use any specific measurements. All the measurements in the rulebook are paces, and you decide what paces are. It has some examples of how you might want to make your paces. So for here, the examples are 10mm models, one pace might be a centimetre, 15mm models, one pace might be half an inch, and so on and so on. But it's ultimately up to you and your opponent, and there's nothing to say that you can't change that from game to game, depending on your table size. It should be noted, and this is something else I really liked, is that the game is designed to work on a more standard size tabletop, so 6x4, 6x6 or 7x5. You can play larger games, but fitting them on a standard size table should work. And again, that just really appealed to me, trying to find ways to make epic miniatures, which do have quite large frontages if you use them all, work on a 6x4 table, but still feel like I'm playing a fairly big game, where a section of the battlefield, again, it just seemed to fit in with the kind of games I'm trying to play. A basic unit refers to the very sort of standardised standard infantry battalion or cavalry squadron or regiment, or whatever the most fitting wargaming term for that is, I suppose. As I've already mentioned, the basing is standardised, but we should be looking between 2 to 6 stands for a regular infantry brigade, and it says later on in the book, when it talks about building your armies, that you should think of a stand of being 100 to 150 men. So rather than just having standardised units of X amount of bases or frontages, you get to think a little bit about the size of the unit in terms of number of men, and how many stands are best to represent that. And if you're like me, and where possible, love to build from historical order of battles, and you actually know the estimated strength of the unit at the start of the battle, you can represent them more accurately in terms of number of stands, and number of stands means number of dice when you're shooting, and in melee and things like that are obviously lots of other modifiers, but makes it quite realistic. So the game and turn itself is driven by the action card deck. And you deal those out at the beginning of the turn, and then you take turns as players to play a card, and so rather than you complete your whole turn, then the other player completes your whole turn. You take turns to do activations, which keeps both players, I suppose, involved in the game throughout. And there are options, and there are things that means you could have 2 turns in a row, as we'll probably cover with some of the way the cards work and some of the actions and events that happen because of them. So you get each player gets 2 cards plus 1 for each of their command stands that are on the tabletop, and command stands are quite important in this game, which is nice from a aesthetic point of view. It means you can model lots of command stands, but you have your divisional commander, you have your brigade commanders, and you also have you can have things like other officers, ADCs and things like that represented as well, I believe. And then you can also have those higher commanders turn up on the battlefield, as I mentioned earlier, so you can have those modelled, and it gives you a chance to kind of, if you like, your painting and your modelling, to have those models on the battlefield, or at least turn up at some point, which is relatively cool. And it's all about resource management, I think, if I was going to sum it up. So each card is made up in a number of ways, and there's a little description in this box here, but there's a picture of one of the cards. The first thing is your orders value, so that's a number of orders that can be issued by a brigade commander using that card. Then you have a special event, which is the second thing there, which is something that may happen on a dice roll. And then the last thing is rallying units, and then it tells you how you can use the card to help rally disruption, which is an important part of the game, disruption of units. And you can't use this card to do all, so you are managing your resources by deciding how to use it, so to speak. So you would issue your cards to your brigade commanders, and then they can issue out orders. And depending how far away from you are from your units, it may take more order points in order to give that unit an order, and so on. The other things may be beneficial at a certain point in the game. Some of the special events are like objectives, so you may well choose to play that objective, and you place your card face down so that your opponent doesn't know what you're doing, and you can score victory points from that at the end. And your opponent can also score victory points from you completing these actions as well. So when you rally some disruption off a unit, you're giving away victory points for doing that. So you really want to think, I suppose, in terms of, is this unit worth saving? Do I need to remove disruption? Are they an important unit, or are they something that be better off to leave and focus my resources on something else? And I love resource management in games. Nearly all of the war games I've played before with good card mechanics have resource management. This is not a historical game, but games like Malifaux, very, very good for managing resources. But also other games that don't use cards directly, but use high levels of resource management are also good as well. They add a tactical element. And I suppose the criticism would be, do those resources reflect what's going on in terms of a historical narrative and what it would be like if you were issuing orders, or do they just become an arbitrary power level or something like that? So in a fantasy game, you may well have a number of power resources that you spend to cause more damage or something, but in this game it's really subtly done, and I think it just reflects the kind of the fog of war, the amount a particular officer will have to do in order to spend time getting a unit to do, or a regiment to do something important. So you're just you're choosing an order of priority as well, where you're going to issue your order first. What's the most important thing? They're a long way away, so it's going to cost me a lot of orders, but I really need to get that unit to advance here or to withdraw. And it means not every unit will make it a specific order each turn. But I suppose it's not about, as wargamers, we like to sometimes activate each of our units in a turn, move them, fire them, etc. And I think it's about abstracting your mind and thinking about, what is a turn? How long is it in terms of in a period of time? Potentially not very long, and these things are all happening straight after each other, and it's just one big order of events, and you're just prioritising each time. In the rulebook itself, here is a big example of a turn, but again, once you've already purchased the rules, you'd have probably read those anyway, and I'll pop links in the description for Warwick's blog, and for you check on Gripping Beast as well. And actually, as long as you've signed up for Gripping Beast, you can download that sort of 5 or 6 page PDF, which is just really nicely laid out, full colour, and you can read a description of a turn, and I'll probably give you a better description of these rules rather than me babbling on the way I am now. But again, I'm not going to teach you to sort of learn how to play the game. That's not what the idea of these are. But I'm just going to give you a flavour of the way the cards work. So the key thing is giving orders, and then, depending, as I mentioned earlier, depending on how far away your unit is, it will cost more order values to do it. And there's lots of kind of orders that you could give. As you imagine, you can march forward at the quick, you can withdraw, you can change formation. Some things may cause disruption if you're tiring your units out, so like marching at the quick. You can charge, you can do firing, so you can volley fire, you can harass, there's cavalry only ones as well and artillery only ones. So you've got harass, which is a light cavalry order, which is there to reflect that light cavalry work differently to heavy cavalry, which not all game systems do a great job of. Heavy cavalry, same thing, and lancers can intimidate, which again is just adds flavour of the period in my mind to the rule set. So as I've mentioned, that the cards allow you to rally and rally off disruption. Disruption is going to be a key sort of stat that you want to maintain, and you can there's different ways that you can rally, and you do it. You kind of work down the list in order of priority. So you work down the first one. Can you rally by withdrawing your models, rally to the colours. You've got taking casualties, so there's a way of removing disruption by actually reducing the number of stands in your unit. So while the game isn't focused around figure removal to show casualties, over the course of a game you'll probably see units shrink slightly, which I quite like. I don't mind it too much either way, but it's quite nice to see them shrink slightly. And again, you obviously have dice per stand for your shooting and for your melee and things, so that makes that easier to work out. So this rallying disruption of units becomes quite important. So you also have special events on those cards, and this is where the real kind of people that don't like card-driven games may get most worried. I think getting your head around resource management as a number on a card isn't quite as random as some of these may be. You still have to roll for these, but it's a way of generating an event which isn't just you giving an order, so to speak. So you've got artillery bombardments, you've got going at the gallop, you've got commanders wounded. You've also got things like fierce cavalry charges, impetuous cavalry, lost orders, militia panic, all these things that if you were watching a movie or reading a book about this period, about a battle, these things would happen, and that many rule sets can't really portray. They become part of your imagination as why a certain dice roll went a certain way, which is fine, absolutely fine, but this actually provides a little bit of framework around making sure those things happen and the narrative's given to you. And again, as I said, it's not going to be for everyone, that kind of thing, and it won't be every time I play a war game I want that kind of thing. Sometimes I just want an afternoon with a beer in my hand and push units towards each other like I would in Black Powder, but for a sort of a long evening's game on a 6x4 with a friend, a game like that could be really, really interesting, and it almost helps drive the game forward in a different way. And in terms of solo play, which is something I'm going to be looking at a little bit more, or assisted solo play. So I have a 7-year-old who's becoming more and more interested in wargaming. He's not going to know what to do in terms of giving orders and really understanding where to move your miniatures. So using the resource management, it's much easier for me to talk him through a few options and say, what do you think's the best to do? And then when he wanders off way high through the game, I can still finish it off. So the card system and things like the special events will actually aid, I believe, players who like to play solo play. It actually gives them a bit of a way of sort of generating what an opponent might do. And the final part on those cards is the battlefield objectives themselves. And you, as far as I'm aware, you once you choose to play that card using the battlefield objective, you place it down, keep it hidden from your opponent. And if you achieve that at the end of the turn, you get the victory points for it. So it may well be that you aim that turn to take some high ground on some scenery with you or something like that, or move your guns, or take a strong point. There's only 6 different options there. I like to play historical based narrative games. I was wondering about how easy it would be to make your own up for those. If you're going to play your cards in card sleeves, you could put a little handwritten or a printed out slip in your card sleeve so they still shuffle normally, which completely change the description of those little objectives that match the narrative of your battlefield. So it may well have something, if you're doing fighting around Hougoumont, La Haye Saint or something like that, you may have something that relates to holding those walls or attacking in a certain way. So skipping towards the back of the book just briefly, just wanted to touch on the sort of stat lines, and they're really nice and straightforward. You have your troop type, so the name and the infantry type, have any special rules that they may have, their quality, which comes up later in the rules, and then you have the discipline, their firing and their melee are all in terms of what dice roll you need on a d6, which I like that built into the stats rather than looking at tables and things like that. It just really, really speeds it up. So they're pretty straightforward, and you don't feel like you need to be taught the stat line. I remember back in the days of originally learning Warhammer Fantasy, and your first chapter is reading what each of the many, many characteristics do and how they work within the game, whereas this feels like the game mechanics are described. It tells you what stat you need to roll on, and you look at your stat line there and it's immediately apparent what they're referring to. Unit formations all as you would expect. Just you describe how you move into them and what they should look like with really nice little pictures there. I won't go into too much detail because most of it is as you'd see in most standard war games, but it is very, very nicely presented and easy to understand. Movement is as movement is in many war games. You've got modifiers and bonuses for crossing different kinds of terrain and things, and I won't list those there because that's pretty straightforward stuff. As I've mentioned earlier, the actual measurements you do are up to you. It's given in paces in the game rules, and you can convert them to whatever standard measurement you want to use, whether that's centimeters, inches. Totally up to you, but I do like the way that it's done. And then the firing itself. It's also pretty straightforward. So we've already seen the stat lines where you have the number that you need to score a hit, and it's all about the number of dice that you're going to be using to fire. And they use basic modifiers really. So you have your number of stands, but then you also have other modifiers as well. So you have to check line of sight and things like that as expected. But then you have to work out whether units are obscured, whether they're in cover, and you're plussing minusing dice off that until you get to the point at the bottom when you realise how many dice you've got to roll, and then you roll them and you're looking for that set score that's in the stat line itself. The next page over we have a section on skirmish fire, and it works along the same lines. We just have slightly different modifiers, slightly longer ranges and things, and you've got rules here for artillery bombardments. And I don't want to get into the minutiae of how each part of the rules work. Is to give you a flavour of the rules, how to present it and what to expect really, and the understanding that the unique part with the cards is probably the most important with that. So as we move into melee, you would need to have a charge order, but after that, resolving melees is similar to shooting as you'd expect in some ways. So you have a number of dice versus a number of dice, and you're rolling to hit a target number, and then there's modifiers plus and minus depending on the quality of your troops versus the quality of the opposition, what formation you're in, whether you're on higher ground, that kind of thing. And then after that you both have a final number at the end, and then both units will have some disruption, and the unit that scores the most wins, and then the unit, depending on the gap between the winning and losing number, that number is used to as far as I understand, cause more disruption, etc. That's it very, very quickly, and probably missed some key points out, but you've got a good enough idea of how that might work. And then you get to the end phase, which it kind of, as all war games tend to have, just kind of gets you back to the place to ready to start the next turn, and you're cleaning up, that kind of thing. So you're checking for reserves, checking for command stands to see whether they're at risk. As you know, that the game relies on card stands in order to get your action cards at the beginning. So if you lose a command stand, you're likely to get less action cards, which gives you less resources moving forward in the game, and so on. You're checking for broken units. You're checking for additional victory points that you may have scored or given away during that turn. Any wounds and things. There's a whole list of sort of checks you go through here. Any battlefield objectives, etc. And then you have the how goes the day roll. So this is something that's quite unique in the game, I think. It's one of those things that some people might complain and say it's a bit arbitrary and can hand someone the advantage, but for me it's expanding upon what you see in a lot of games where you just roll a d6 for initiative. This does that and adds a little bit more flavour to it. Some people like that, some people not. I quite like it. So both sides roll 2d6 and add their tactical advantage modifier, and that we'll come to that a little bit later, and that's to do with the setup of the game and who has the first initiative, so to speak, the beginning of the game. They add that, and you how goes the day, you roll. If you roll double the opposition, you get a victory point. If you roll triple the opposition, you get 2 victory points. So it increases that, but it also decides who's going next in the next turn. So you do checks on your commanders, and you check with the end of the game. So if the victory points that you have equal or exceed the enemy's break point, you win the game. And if not, you start the next turn. There's a few unit special rules here dealt with in the next section. There's not too many, which I quite like. Sometimes special rules can get really, really bloaty in games, and that may well happen if there's more supplements in the future, they could be added. But some of the well-known game systems from larger manufacturers out there, especially in the science fiction market, have new special rules added all the time, and sometimes the name of that special rule is exactly the same as another rule with a different name, and it can get really confusing if you're not really rules minded like some of us aren't. I'm definitely not included. So there's a few special rules there, and it takes you through it on those pages, and that's a nice little number for me. Then we move on to battles and battlefields section, and we talk about the tactical advantage part, which I sort of touched on earlier. So at the start of the game, you want to determine who's got the tactical advantage and who starts the game. So rather than just rolling off, you go through all these different sections, and I'm not going to take you through it in full detail, but it's about if you think of the campaign leading up to the engagement, you're looking at who's manoeuvred the best, who's ready to attack, who has the best ground, etc., etc. And this is all keyed up in that. Now, saying all of that, most of these things are modifiers with if you're playing as part of a campaign, but you are still rolling dice, but it's 2d6, but it does give you some benefits at the start of the game. And the most important one, I suppose, will be who goes first, but you've also got who's deploying first and what table edge you're choosing as well. There's also a section here called Tactical Orders, which is kind of represents the orders as a divisional commander that you've been given by your superiors. So whether they want you to attack or hold or advance. And again, I suppose depending on what kind of war game you're playing, you can leave these things out if you don't want them. If you really want to add them in, then it adds some extra flavour. You may well find that the piece of history that you're reenacting provides all the flavour you're happy with. You have a terrain generator. Again, that's really handy if you're playing a sort of almost a match-up game with an opponent at the same points level rather than creating some kind of narrative scenario. It really depends on your wargaming. I very often just make a table look cool and go from there, but some people like to generate tables using tables, funnily enough. We've got some rules on buildings here. And then you've got the section on deployment as well. So you've got your tactical advantage to decide who's going to deploy first or second, but you also have deployment plans, and you choose these if you want to. You can choose these in secret, and then you reveal them, and then you set out your miniatures as per the tactical, and there's 6 different versions there. And again, this is the kind of thing in a rule book I often skim past thinking, well, I'll work to the scenario that I've written myself, which tends to be a way I play a lot of historical war games, or I've worked out from whatever battle I'm recreating. But in reality, a lot of the games we play are with just I haven't quite got the time to do that being a big reenactment. I've still got to paint some models, but you get together with a friend just for a game in an afternoon, and using this section of the rule book, it can just generate it all for you and give you some real flavour to your game. And that kind of brings you onto your pre-game sequence, takes you through choosing your points, generating your terrain, and all of that extra stuff. Again, I'll leave that to those of you who are really interested in these rules. I recommend picking them up, and then you can read those in detail. But you've got a little bit of an idea of the extra stuff that's in the rules, aside from just the kind of how you shoot and fight people, and when you run away or not. And you've even got some optional rules here about special circumstances, say like lack of draft horses, well chosen ground, and there's some little extra bonuses and things that will give you extra flavour. So all of that kind of stuff is included in the rule set, which is, if you like me, you're used to black powder style games, which is very open and very sandbox. These things remind me more of some of the fantasy games or things I played in the past, where a lot of this kind of stuff is more built into the rule set. But I think it's quite cool. And that's kind of taking you through the core of the rules there. There'll be lots of things I've slightly said wrong. If Warwick's watching this, I don't know why he would be if he does end up watching this review, or anyone who's play tested on it and knows the games well, just if I've really severely misrepresented a rule or something, just pop a comment on the video, because it'll be good for people to see. Now, the second half of the book is armies and theatres, so it tells you how to build an army. It talks about game size, which I covered a little bit at the beginning. Talks about points and things. Now, I quite often skim over army lists in Wargames, historical Wargames rules, because it's, like I've mentioned a lot, it doesn't tend to be how I play a war game. I'm more likely to find an area of a real battle and aim towards that, and my army list will be the order of battle, or a slimmed down section of order of battle. But like I've mentioned a moment ago, it is sometimes nice to kind of have a matched off game against someone as well, and this provides you with the rules to do that. There's a little section here on your command stands and how they work in games in terms of the things they do, inspiration, re-rolls, drawing extra cards, corps commanders and army commanders turning up on the battlefield, as I've mentioned already. And like I said, it's, for me, for a painter and a modeler, gives me the opportunity to make up some more stands, which are really, really cool to have on the tabletop. So you'll have at least one for each of your brigade commanders in your divisional, but as I said, you can have senior officers, you can have corps commanders, army commanders. I love it. And then some optional units, so central reserve. This is where you're looking at your off-table batteries, maybe ambulances, supply trains. Really, really cool stuff. Unique units. There's some rules for some unique units. I'm guessing they're the kind of units that you don't want to necessarily dominate games because they are specialist or something like that. But it's cool to have rules for them here. Commanders of note, so some named commanders. You've got some special rules to give them. So divisional commander, you can extra points can give them extra abilities and things. But it's again more flavour added, which you can and can't use depending on whether you want to or not. You've got great battles. This is for some sort of things on top if you want to play a game that's a bit bigger than 5 brigades or so bigger than a divisional. Gives you an idea. So division plus, sorry, remember that's with your reserves and maybe cavalry bits and bits from other divisions that are lent to you. But this gives you ideas if you want to play a bigger multiplayer game or something like that, you can still do it. And then it brings you on to this section. So you've got the War of the Six Coalition and some write-up and some history. And then you flick through all of this, there's lots and lots of it, and you've got army lists for that. So your War of the Six Coalition. So you've got your main nations that are covered there from the Sixth Coalition. I'm flicking through quite quickly here because I'm not going to review the army lists. I think that the video will be long enough as it is. Then you've got War of the Seventh Coalition, which is of course the Waterloo campaign, and the same thing for that. So you've got a little bit of history there. Not that it's new to most people that are going to buy this set of rules, can't imagine it is. And then you've got army lists for that as well. Now, when I first watched Ralph's review actually, and mentioned this set of rules in my vlog that I do for my Epic Battles project, mentioned potentially using it, there were a few questions about the rules. State at the beginning that it's a war game for the period 1805 to 1815, and that when you get to the army list, they only start from the Sixth Coalition. Now, some people were asking, well, is it missing? Have they taken it out? There were a couple of comments, and it got me looking into it in a little bit more detail. But it wasn't my initial interpretation of that. My initial interpretation of it was, well, they're war games rules from 1805 to 1815, and in this book just happens to be army lists for that period. And I just assumed that it would be too much to fit all in one book maybe, or something like that, and it would come along at a later date. And then obviously looking at the book when I first got it, it quite clearly states on the back of the book that it contains 2 campaign theatres for the 6th and the 7th Coalition, so 1813-14 and 1815. So I don't think they were ever intended. I did a little bit of digging around. I joined the Soldiers of Facebook group, which I didn't find very easily actually. I didn't know it existed until someone else pointed it out. Thank you, Adrian. But he pointed out, and he was one of the guys I was chatting with about whether that stuff was omitted from the book deliberately, or whether it was a mistake or not. And he pointed me to that group, and I listened to a Wargames Soldiers and Strategy podcast with an interview with Warwick as well. And it's very, very clear that none of that stuff is omitted from the book at all. The book would be too big. There's a cap on page numbers for when you're printing this kind of size of softback book, and you know, Artoris Games, as far as I know, it might just be Warwick, maybe someone else. So we're talking a small company here, high costs, printing in relatively low numbers. We're not talking about big companies like Wargames when they can get large print runs from China in hardback at Wargames Workshop and so on and so on. So I imagine that that's got an awful lot to do with it. And then looking at a few answers and comments in the Facebook group, and as part of that interview, it's quite clear that this was deliberate, and they're working on earlier lists now from I'm guessing from the 3rd, the 4th and the 5th coalitions, and there's talk in that group about someone's playtesting Peninsula, which is massively interest to me, and those that follow me on the channel will know that after my Waterloo part of my my epic building, the other battle I'm working on is going to be a Peninsula based project, so I'll be really eager to get the stat lines and the rules for that, so that I can also play Peninsula games using the set of rules as well, because I think that would be fun. But the reason that the rules say 1805 onwards is because that's the entire set of rules, and then there's only space in this book for the 6th and 7th coalitions. The other stuff is coming, especially this set as well, but they are working on something right now as far as I can tell, which is fantastic. So overall, hopefully you haven't found that more confusing than helpful. Just as I said at the beginning, really interested in the rules, and having read them and played around a little bit, I've become more interested in them rather than less. They are everything that I thought they might be from the description of the game. And that, if you were going to do one thing, to go to the Grip and Beast website and just read the description of a turn, and it's probably easier to read in terms of its presentation on that PDF that's on the Grip and Beast website. So I'm really happy with them. I'm looking forward to using them. I'm going to be using them with my epic battle stands. Maybe in a separate video or vlog I'll talk a little bit about how I may use the stands for epic battles with this. So aside from this, what other resources are there? So there is a downloadable quick reference guide from the Grip and Beast website. I believe it's also in the files section of the Soldiers of Facebook group, which also covers obviously the Soldiers of Rome and the Soldiers of God games as well. Again, links in the description for the Facebook group, etc. You can buy this from Grip and Beast. It's £30 plus £5 postage in the UK. I think about £7.50 to EU and £15 for the rest of the world. And that's where I have seen a couple of comments from people, and it's obviously not the games designer's fault, but that's just the cost of shipping around the world. But £45 starts to get might get a bit expensive for a set of rules that you've not tried out, and that's why we talked about the PDF at the beginning. You might get more people involved, but North Star do it for £30 as well, and their postage works out a little bit cheaper because it's a percentage. And I think it works out as £3.50 in the UK, £6 in the EU, and £10 for the rest of the world, which is cheaper. And Caliber Books, I think, do free shipping worldwide over £30. That's what it says. But they've got the book at $29.50, I think, which is quite clever. So maybe you'd have to purchase something else cheap to get you free shipping. But again, you may well find that works out better for you. And it may be retailers overseas. I know there was a retailer in Europe that looks like it was stocking it, but I definitely recommend picking them up. Well done for making it to the end of the video. I've been joined by one of my cats, Alan, for the close. It seems he's decided to turn up. Maybe he wants to play Soldiers of Napoleon as well. As you've heard, I'm a fan of the rules. They look pretty good, and I'm really looking forward to sort of delving into it a little bit more. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you're new to the channel and you found it just because of the review of these rules, you've been searching on YouTube or Googling or something like that, do check out the other videos. There's plenty of Napoleonic stuff on there, a lot of it epic battles from Wargames, but there's lots of other things on there as well. Loads of painting tutorials. My day job is a commission painter, so do check those out. Give the channel a subscription, give us the video a like. It really helps me out if you've enjoyed it. If you haven't, not to worry, you're probably not still watching now anyway. But thanks very much for watching, take care, and I'll catch you all soon.